Please welcome our last speaker, Jeremy Corbyn.
Thank you very much, Andrew, and thank you, George, for that brilliant speech that you've just given us this evening. And definition of empire will stick with me. It's a good one. When I was first elected to Parliament, some of you might remember the late great Joan Maynard, who was a very good, very strong Labour MP. And the first day I was in Parliament, she sat me down and gave me a cup of tea, looked across the table and said, "Jeremy, if during the time you're here you find both front benches are in agreement, it's wrong. And your duty is to be on the other side." And she went on to say, "And whenever ministers talk about making tough decisions, it's the poor who are going to suffer." Yeah. She was very sound, was Joan, and she always had a wise word to say. I've just come now because we had another bad day in the House. We had a debate on one of the clauses of the Police and Social Responsibility Bill. It's a very odd title for a very odd bill, because the two things don't seem to be totally connected, but there we are. It was on the question of universal jurisdiction and the rights of arrest warrants in this country. As you know, at the present time, if somebody arrives in this country against whom there is prima facie evidence that they have committed war crimes or crimes against humanity, then on an application to the district judge at Westminster Court, Horseferry Road, that's the only court that can do it, then an arrest warrant can be issued and the Attorney General can then proceed with prosecution. But there's quite a high threshold to get an arrest warrant. Indeed, very few such arrest warrants have ever been granted. And universal jurisdiction is a post-Pinochet innovation in Britain, something I absolutely support, the idea that there's universal jurisdiction on crimes against humanity anywhere in the world. The district judge duly issued an arrest warrant, as you'll recall, in 2009 after Operation Cast Lead in Gaza, and he issued an arrest warrant against Zippy Livni, and this was deemed to be deeply undermining of our relations with a peace-loving nation and with a person who was apparently here on a peace mission. That was apparently Zippy Livni's reason for being in this country, and she was quickly spirited away to avoid the arrest taking place, and ever since then they vowed to change this. And tonight a number of us put down an amendment to remove this clause which would take away the right of a citizen to apply for an arrest warrant and say that the arrest warrant could only be applied for by the Director of Public Prosecution on the advice of the Attorney General. And both front benches gave the game away, in which they said, well, of course, you have to take foreign policy considerations into it, don't you? Well, actually, no, you don't. If somebody's committed a war crime, they've committed a war crime. Whether they're from a so-called friendly nation or an enemy nation, they've committed a war crime. So I absolutely emphatically voted on this, and that's why I've only just come now. But that was compounding what happened earlier in the day, in which William Hague arrived and made yet another statement on Libya. To his credit, he makes one about every day, and each day is worse than the one the day before. He started off by saying that he was very concerned about the situation in Libya, and they were considering a no-fly zone. This is only about 10 days ago. And then they would go to the UN, and they would eventually get this no-fly zone. And it was absolutely specific. It was only a no-fly zone. It was limited to that. There was no other involvement, absolutely no question whatsoever of any boots on the ground or taking sides in the civil war. Then here we are now, 10 days into this conflict. Goodness knows how many hundreds of millions of dollars have been spent by the USA and tens of millions of pounds have been spent by Britain on bombing Libya. We have taken sides in a civil war. We are part of a civil war. And when he was asked the question of, two questions he was asked, well, many questions he was asked, but specifically, would British troops ever be on the ground in Libya? He said, well, no, not really, but we can never say never and never say no, because after all we did send an SAS group in to save some British citizens, and there might be a training role in the future. watch out for the military advisors. Think the history of Vietnam, military advisors in 1960, 5 years later, tens of thousands of military advisors, a few years after that, 100,000 US troops in Vietnam. That is where it goes to. That is the descent that's the whole trajectory we're going on. And then he was asked why other nations weren't involved to the same extent. And he then went on to say how much he welcomed the work of the new transitional government, or whatever it calls itself, in Benghazi, and how he'd encouraged them to issue a very long statement, which he instantly produced. I just wondered where it had been written. And at no stage did he explain how the people that are now being fated as the potential new government of Libya were, a matter of 20 days ago, close confidants of Colonel Gaddafi. I mean, I know people make fast political journeys, but this is some journey at some pace that's going on. Make no mistake about it, we are involved in a civil war. George is right. This is a war about control, it's a war about influence, and above all, it's a war about oil. And if the West can then create for itself a statelet in the east of Libya, which it looks like it's going to do, and leave Gaddafi in the West as a pariah state, then maybe they can live with that degree of instability, and goodness knows what problems that instability is going to cause in the future. And I think we've just got to be very, very aware of what we're involved in and the dangers of this. But there's another factor in this, which I don't know has come out in any of the earlier speeches. Every military establishment in Western Europe, and the United States for that matter, are under some pressure funding-wise. More planes? Why aren't we getting more missiles? Why aren't we getting more bombs? Why aren't we spending more money on the military? It's a self-perpetuating process of proving they can do it, therefore they have to have even more wherewithal in which to do it. And when I asked Haig the question about what was being done about promoting some kind of ceasefire in Libya, what was being done about stopping the fighting now, where was the involvement of the African Union or anybody else in this, he said he had spoken to Museveni, President Museveni of Uganda, who is a world-renowned expert on human rights and internal conflict of the highest order. And you quickly get the impression this is a British, French, and to some extent American operation to get control of a lot of resources, a lot of weaponry is involved, and they are going to control it. And this government that was invited over from Benghazi yesterday are part of the process of, no doubt in a very short time, receiving arms, but above all, making oil contracts, as George has pointed out. And so when we are criticised as not caring about human rights, not caring about suffering, I say two things to them. The hypocrisy of this whole process is breathtaking. Saudi Arabia invades Bahrain, not a word is said about it. Many, many people are killed in Yemen. Very little is said about it. Many political prisoners rot away in jails in Saudi Arabia. Not a lot is said about it. The Gulf Cooperation Council approve of all these operations, and not a lot is said about it. Yes, we do care about human rights universally, and we care about those rights universally. And I agree with George that the rights that people have won in post-colonial territories have never been willingly granted by European or American occupying powers. They've been won by the people in those countries. And so I want to see the achievements of these very brave people that have risen up in Algeria, in Tunisia, in Egypt, countries all across the piece. They've risen up because they want accountable government. They want their say. They want jobs. They don't want neoliberal economics imposed. They don't want to become exporters only of primary products. They want to become self-respecting nations, part of the rest of the world. They're not looking for wars. They're looking for peace. What we're doing is offering occupation, weapons, more arms sales, more oil exploitation, and more of this neo-colonial relationship between Europe and North Africa. And that is what is so disgusting and so wrong with this. If the European governments, and I'll finish on this point, were so concerned about human rights all across the region and all across North Africa, how come so many hundreds of desperate poor people have drowned on the Mediterranean trying to escape poverty and misery all over Africa, and not much has been said about that? And how come they were quite happy to work with and praise Gaddafi in assisting in stopping African migration into Europe? The stench of hypocrisy has never been higher than it is at the present time. And our tragedy is that we have a media that by and large, not exclusively, but by and large, have become cheerleaders for the military and cheerleaders for military activities. We need to think this thing through. Let's look for peace, look for justice, but you're not going to find it on a Tomahawk missile. You're not going to find it on a cruise missile. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much indeed, Jeremy, for that contribution, and congratulations again on your stand in Parliament. I'd like to thank all our speakers, and thank all of you for coming, and remember to support the Stop the War Coalition, to support the actions we'll be taking in the weeks ahead for as long as is necessary until we bring this latest bloody conflict to an end. Thank you.